2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. I've been thinking lately about the fragility of life. Maybe it's because I recently put another year behind in my life. I don't know. Whatever the reason, it's good to meditate on our own mortality from time to time, realize that we're just kind of fragile. We're all going to die sooner or later. When Pat Conroy wrote South of the Border, he included this sobering description of how death is woven into our existence from the earliest days. He said, the moment you're born, your death is foretold by your newly minded cells as your mother holds you up, then hands you to your father, who gently tickles the stomach where the cancer will one day form, studies the eyes where melanoma's dark signature is already written on the optic nerve, touches the back where the liver will one day house the cirrhosis, feels the bloodstream that will sweeten itself into diabetes, admires the shape of the head where the brain will fall to the axe handle of stroke, and listen to the heart, which, exhausted by the fearful ways and humiliations and indecencies of life, will explode in your chest like a light going out in the world. Death lives in each one of us and begins its countdowns on our birthday and makes its rough entrance at the last hour and the perfect time. Interesting way to look at it, is it? In a deeper sense, we're born saying hello, and the rest of life we're saying a long goodbye. That thought, reinforced by the late night call telling us that a loved one has died unexpectedly, kind of brings all this to a deeper truth. And that is that the way we respond to the trials of life reveals a great deal about our strength in this Christian life. How do we respond in times of trouble? If we deny our troubles, or if we give in to anger or bitterness, or we blame others for our problems, we miss what God intends to teach us during those times. It's a great advance spiritually, actually, to be able to say, I believe God has allowed this difficulty for my good and for His glory. And in verses 8 and 9, Paul makes 4 statements that describe the true condition of believers in the world, and they're always true. They are always true, each one of these, even though our experience in them varies. The first part of verse 8, you notice, tells us that pressure will not defeat us. It says, we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. The word troubled was sometimes used for walking through a crowd when people were surrounding you and pressing in on you. The pressures of life may squeeze us, but we are not utterly crushed, is what he's saying. And here's some ways that this phrase is translated or paraphrased in other versions. New Living Translation says, we're pressed on every side by troubles, but we're not crushed. The New English Bible says, hard pressed on every side, we are never hemmed in. But look at the rest of verse 8, because Paul goes on to remind us that confusion will not discourage us. He says we're perplexed, but we're not in despair. Sometimes we just don't know which way to go. Life has a way of throwing us a curveball now and then. Sometimes we face circumstances that are so confusing that we honestly don't know what we need to do. We don't know what we want, really. We don't know what's best for us. Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 26, that sometimes we don't know how to pray. And there are moments when the pressure is so great, we're so tired, we're so worn out, life has become so confusing that we honestly don't know what to say to the Lord. Sometimes all we can do is cry out, God, help. And that really is enough, because you see, the Lord knows all things, and He can kind of fill in the details when He sees our heart crying out to Him. People sometimes ask for more information so they can pray more intelligently. And I'm all for that. I think that's good at times, but it's not like the Lord needs that information from us to somehow figure out the problem. He understands our needs. He knows exactly what we need and how to help us. Sometimes we're puzzled, perplexed by life. Sometimes we're bewildered and unsure, and that's okay. When we're confused, we can be sure that Jesus is not confused. We're not driven to despair because life doesn't depend on our knowledge of the big picture. when we are within, God is just getting started. But did you see what he said in the first part of verse 9? He tells us that opposition will not deter us. He says we are persecuted, but not forsaken. Greek word translated persecuted here means to pursue, like a hunter pursues his game. And the word conjures up the movie scenes, you know, of the hero, that he knows he's being followed wherever he goes. He can't quite see his enemy. They're out there. He knows they're out there, and they're always watching over his back, looking in the storefront glass, trying to see if there's somebody
everywhere he went.
His Jewish opponents were following him. They
Paul
stayed
knew
on
about
this
this
trail all the
from
time, attacking his character, maligning his preaching, mocking his message, stirring up opposition inside and outside of the church. They never gave him a moment's rest. He was constantly persecuted. And that's why the New Living Translation translates that we are hunted down. And that's how he felt, like an animal fleeing through the underbrush with the hounds hot on its trail. Bob Jones Sr. Used to say, the door of opportunity swings on the hinge of opposition. And that's so true. Opportunity and opposition, they kind of go together. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 9, Paul describes the situation when he says, for a great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries. The English Standard Version says, a wide door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. Now, if you set out to do anything good in this world, someone is bound to oppose you. It seems like we never can always find people to go along with us. And if you decide to devote yourself to the cause of Christ, you can expect that some people close to you will not even appreciate you. But we're not abandoned by God. Matthew chapter 28, you remember, toward the end of that chapter, you'll see the Great Commission, where Christ calls his followers to go into all the world and make disciples. And we focus on that part of it especially. But we must never forget the command is bracketed by two powerful statements. In verse 18, he says, all authority has been given to me. And then on the other end of that Great Commission, in verse 20, he says, I am with you always. It's as if the neighborhood bully has challenged us to a fight and we're scared to death of what might happen to us. And then up walks Paul Bunyan, 10 feet tall, arms like tree trunks, massive chest, rude cheeks, deep tan, a huge axe in his hand. He smiles and, no interference, he simply says, don't worry, I got this. I'm going to be right with you. You don't have to worry about a thing. How do you feel now? Well, bring that back to the words of Jesus. Go into all the world and make disciples, but remember this, you're not going alone. I'm going to be right there with you. Not about what we do, it's about what Jesus does through us. We do the going and telling, but Jesus does everything else. We're never alone, even when we're rejected, hated, mocked, ridiculed, vilified. Lord Jesus is right there with us. As Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego found out, they were down there in the furnace, and they saw a fourth man. They knew that the Son of God was right there with them. Now the rest of verse 9 tells us that hard hits will not destroy us. He says we're cast down, but we're not destroyed. J.B. Phillips offers this memorable paraphrase of that verse, that part of the verse. He says, we may be knocked down, but we're never knocked out. Here we are in a boxing ring. We've just taken one on the chin. We see stars, and for a moment everything goes black, and we fall flat on the mat. You know, if you live long enough, you'll be hit with a sucker punch sooner or later. The term struck down refers to sudden emergency, unforeseen incident, late night phone call, the crisis that seems to come out of nowhere, the catastrophe that overwhelms us, the earthquake, the hurricane, all of those things that shock and bring fear to the heart. Most of us feel like we can handle moderate trouble. You can handle the cranky boss or the sick child or the prickly neighbor. We know what to do when we have a fender bender, when electricity goes off. We can scrimp for a few days when the money gets short. We know when we're sick enough that we need to see the doctor. Because we know that into each life some rain must fall. We know where to find the umbrella when the dark clouds are forming. But what will we do when the rain becomes a thunderstorm and the thunderstorm becomes a hurricane? What then? Mike Tyson, the boxer, famously remarked, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." If you live long enough, you'll be punched in the mouth more than once. Sometimes you'll see the blow coming. Quite often it comes out of nowhere. It's a big mistake to think that God promises to shield his children from all the difficulties of life. What happens to others happens to us too. We get sick, our children get sick, we get laid off, recession takes away our savings, chemo doesn't always work. What then? More and more I'm convinced that our best answer to the world is not a clever argument. We have to prove that Jesus rose from the dead. Clever arguments can only take us so far. Our friends will judge our Christianity by what they see every day, Monday through Sunday. We need a theology of suffering if we're going to reach the generation. They see us hurting, and what do they see and hear when they're hurting? Is it the same thing that they see and hear when we're not hurting? Do they see a sterling, silver, Christian character in front of them? If Christians are truly the light of the world, when is the light most likely to be seen? The bright sun shining, or when it's dark? That's when you can really see the light. The answer is obvious, and it's not as if we have to choose. We're the light of the world 24 hours a day. But our testimony given in the midst of hardship and sorrow will resonate more loudly because it comes at midnight. And so we hear the chant of the crowd, the chant of the crowd, "Get up, get up." And then we hear our best friend in the front row seat saying, "Get on your feet, you could do it, don't give up." The referee starts to count. Just before he gets to 10, we gather enough strength to get to our knees, and then we struggle to our feet. Our eyes begin to clear up, and we're ready to go again. Are you under pressure? I imagine you are. Do you get confused sometimes? Probably. Do we face harsh criticism? Quite often. Are we knocked down sometimes? More often than we want to admit. That's life, really. That's reality. That's the truth for every follower of Jesus. If you thought anything different, anything was going to be different when you got saved, you need to go back to your recruiter and the one who signed you up. Talk about all of this and be reminded that you'll get a free pass when you get saved. Too many Christians want life to be like the Pirates of the Caribbean ride in the Disney World. I don't know if you've ever gone on that. You float on this little boat, and you see menacing pirates on this side and on that side, and they've got the sword and they're swinging at you. You know, you're just kind of going down through this water. It looks all terrifying. It looks fearful, but they never come close. So you have a thrill ride, but you're never really in danger. Life isn't like that. Life is hard. We face danger around every corner. We don't get to choose our troubles. It's not like a cafeteria where you go down the line and you pick, I'll take some of that and I'll take some of that. No, not quite that much. More of that, you know. John Newton, the wicked slave trader who came to God, was a glorious slave, wrote about all this. He said, though through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. In his book, The Dance of Hope, Bill Frey remembers the day when he tried to pull a stump out of the Georgia dirt. Just an 11-year-old boy. But one of his chores was to gather firewood for the small stove and fireplace in their homestead. He searched the wood for stumps of pine trees because when they were cut down, you chopped them into kindling, and they had a lot of sap in them, and they burned quick, they burned hot. One day he says, I found a large stump in an open field near the house and tried to unearth it. I literally pushed and pulled and crowbarred for hours, but the root system was so deep and large I simply couldn't pull it down the ground. I was still struggling when my father came from the office, spotted me working, and came over to watch. I think I see your problem, he said. What's that? I asked. You're not using all your strength. I exploded and told him how hard I'd worked and for how long. No, he said, you're not using all your strength. When I cooled down, I asked him what he meant, and he said, you haven't asked me to help you yet. Sometimes you feel backed into corners. Sometimes you may think God's forgotten you. But just hang on. And you'll see God's power at work. And though you're broken by life sometimes, you'll win in the ultimate victory. If you know Jesus, if you remain faithful to him, we're in great shape today. We'll be in great shape tomorrow. And we'll be in great shape for eternity. Praise his name. He never leaves us, nor forsakes us.